everybody, welcome back to the channel. I'm Marla Sands. I'm joined again by Michael Long, who will be helping me discuss Shirley Jackson's Haunting of Hill House. And we might even get a little bit more in there with M.R. James or maybe some other authors. But remember, if you like this, to hit like and subscribe or hit that bell notification button if you want to put up more videos. And to begin with, I will throw it over to Michael to discuss Shirley Jackson's novel.
I was amazed. I mean, I think I'm going to be using the original film adaptation to kind of discuss the novel because I was noticing the similarities and dissimilarities as I went along. And I was really amazed at how closely they did follow the story in the 1963 film version of it, with Robert Wise directing that. And of course, Robert Wise, as you may know, was the film editor on Citizen Kane, and also directed some of the films from the Val Lewton production times. Learned a lot about filming and telling ghost stories and not showing you the ghost. He learned how to do that from Val Lewton, who didn't have the budget to show you the monster. So the movie version of The Haunting of Hill House uses that quite a bit, that idea of not showing but just leading up to or hinting at or showing you the consequences of something. Doors bulging, hearing the sounds of the ghosts going down the hallway but never quite seeing them. But I did think the book, as I said, followed that pretty closely. Didn't give you a lot of backstory in the beginning, as I recall, in the book. We get a little more of that visually in the movie, which sets us up for what we're going to see visually later. Although in the book, she does sort of begin that first page and end the last page in the book with a sort of an echo of, nothing, whatever walks there walks alone, basically the last line of the book. So I thought that was interesting. The book too, I thought, in one of the ways that a movie can almost be better than a book at times, the book kind of let us in on the grounds of Hill House. In other words, we got to go outside. Mm-hmm. We got to see the forests and the trees and the stream, and it was sort of a relief to get out of the house.
Yeah, they have a picnic at some point.
Pardon?
They have a picnic at some point.
Yeah, they have a picnic, and they go out there a couple of times, and and Luke is talking, and is flirting with Theodora or whatever their conversation is. So I thought, well, the movie, at least, once you got in the house, you never got out again until the very end. It was very claustrophobic in that way. And I thought that was a little bit better for conveying the claustrophobia, the idea of being swallowed up by the house, which is what Eleanor is talking about, or at least experiencing. And we're kind of experiencing that with her. And then the other thing in the book that surprised me, as I said, as we were talking earlier, I hadn't really read it for maybe 30 years. Rereading it, the character of the professor's wife, Mrs. Montague, almost seemed to me like a comic relief character, somebody who was just sort of thrown in there to be a foil for what the serious ghost investigators are doing. And she's like all over the place wrong with whatever she's doing. And her companion, which I hadn't even remembered that she'd had a companion, Arthur, totally cut out of the movie version. I kind of thought that was almost a letdown. I don't know why Shirley Jackson had that in there. Maybe she felt like she needed to lighten it up a bit at the end or near the end to make the end more horrifying in some way. I don't know. It didn't really work that way for me. So that's just another one of those differences that I was aware of as I was reading it. Mm-hmm. I thought the most effective scene, though, in the story, and they cover this in the movie version too, was where she had to move out of her room because of that horrible writing in red.
Right.
Help Eleanor come home. So they moved Theodora in with her, and I reread this passage several times because I was wondering, how did Shirley Jackson do this? It's one of the things I remember from 30 years ago being shocked at when I read it. She's holding Theodora's hand because they have their beds next to each other, and horrible things are happening. They hear the noises, and then at the end, when the light comes on, Theodora is not next to her. She's across the room, And she wonders then what hand has she been holding that whole time that's been squeezing her so tightly. And Shirley Jackson really, she really sets you up by saying, well, if I can even find the passage, not even sure I can find it that quickly, but basically she says from Eleanor's point of view, Eleanor and Theodore were holding hands. So you've got the author telling you, well, that's what's happening. And you're like, well, that must be what's happening. And then it's a surprise to you at the end when you realize they're not holding hands. Eleanor's holding somebody's hand or something's hand, but not Theodore's hand. So I guess it's one of those instances where the author can kind of slip that in there and get you thinking along the wrong track and then surprise you at the end, sort of like a magic trick.
So it is a good trope, I guess. That, you're in the dark and you think you're with somebody, and because humans want companionship, right? So things are less scary if you have a friend, and then maybe not so much, right?
I think that's the thing. If what you are encountering is familiar and comforting, but then suddenly that's turned on its head, that's where the creepiness and the dread, like my whole bottom has been taken off or taken out, so you're sort of hanging there. I think those are effective things to do, and stories do that very well. Fiction can do that really well. Written stories, because it's in your head as you're acting it out in your own mind. So yeah, when Shirley Jackson was doing that, I thought those were great moments in the book.
She has a lot of conversations where characters are having multiple conversations over each other a lot, and that is kind of an interesting technique, just a writing technique, I guess, to have people discussing more than one thing. So if Luke says one thing and Theodora says a completely different thing, but maybe Theodora's talking to Eleanor and Luke is talking to someone else or something, and you have the dialogue is all mixed up.
Shirley Jackson had kind of a large family, as I recall, from other stories when she's talking about them, and I wonder if that was taken from that, or was she influenced by movies at all? I mean, this morning I was rewatching Orson Welles' Touch of Evil, and Welles was notorious for having actors talk over each other and several conversations going on, and you're trying to piece it all together, but it seems a little more lifelike in a way and more realistic rather than so staged.
So other thoughts about this? I mean, there was a 1999 movie of A Haunting.
Yeah, I saw that one a long time back when it came out.
I think we may own a copy. I'm not sure. There are things I like about it. I love the sets. I'd love to live somewhere where I could visit this house, because obviously it's a soundstage, so you can't. But just the big columns and the curving hallways and these big rooms that are decorated so interestingly. It's kind of like was it Crimson? It was a few years ago. Whatever. Anyway, those sets were so elaborate that watching them, even on a 35-inch TV, you just didn't see enough of the detail. I think on the big screen, you could tell that there's just all this stuff, and every wall is covered in stuff, and there's little curlicues, and there's little bits, and there's bits of furniture, and there's so much stuff, and it's all elaborate and ornate, and you just want to look at it. I think the movie 1999 Haunting is kind of like that, where I just like to look at it a lot. But I was surprised considering how many people say, it's a horrible movie. Okay, I'm not going to say it's a great movie, but how much of the story they did keep. We do still have all those characters. They do still have a lot of similar conversations, and they're doing a similar kind of study, and Eleanor does kind of get eaten by the house. So, but she doesn't run her car into the tree at the front gate. But still, they did keep a lot of it in there.
There was a lot of backstory about children, as I recall.
Yeah, there was all these children that her great-great-grandfather or whatever basically would lure into the house and then, I guess, kill them.
Yeah.
So one reason why the house is built the way it is so that they could play this elaborate hide-and-seek and these curving hallways and these weirdly decorated rooms and with the secret passages and all that kind of stuff, so that it's hard to find them, but because once you got found, apparently and then all these bones are in the ash, the fire pit underneath the fireplace,
which was not in the movie at all, or not in the book. I mean, at all. Yeah, I guess when I saw it, I was a little disappointed because having watched the original one many, many times for classes or examples of classes, in classes, I was always struck with how they were able to make you feel creepy without showing you things.
Mhm.
And I thought, well, with this newer film, they wanted to use all the CG effects that they could, and it didn't bother me as much as not seeing the thing. Um, so I don't know. I could probably watch it again and see if I have a different opinion this time.
So you think this book holds up for our readers today?
Well, I think you have to be willing to have a leisurely time with it. It's not something you're going to be racing through necessarily. Um, I found it interesting, and I also found it did kind of meander a bit more than I remembered. So
Mhm.
as long as you're expecting that, or as long as you or know that that's kind of what you're in for, then sort of surrender yourself to it. It's like we were talking about earlier with not Henry James stories, but M.R. James, who sometimes writes like Henry James. Uh, Sometimes I'm in the mood for that, and I can just kind of sit and read a paragraph at a time and enjoy the paragraph and his little sense of humor that he works into it. Other times I'm like, come on, get on with it. I want to get to the story.
Right.
So I think it all depends on what mood you're in when you approach it, and if you allow yourself to surrender to the author, you kind of have to meet the author on their terms. And if you're in that frame of mind, then I think The Haunting of Hill House is fine to read, and so are the M.R. James stories.
So back to the Haunting of Hill House. Then, what about the TV version? That was on what 2 years ago or so?
Yeah, I missed
Watched
that.
it. Okay.
Yeah.
I think it was 10 episodes. Some of them kind of bored me. Some of them I was intrigued by. But I really kind of want to go back and rewatch it because apparently in every scene in the house, it takes place in the house, there is a ghost somewhere.
Oh.
So you have to be really sharp-eyed to know, because it might just be like, somebody back in the corner, or maybe you can see an arm from around a desk or something. But if you look, apparently there is at least one ghost in every shot. And you also, and I didn't notice it at first. My husband picked up on it more. There are all these statues everywhere, but like when you walk by them, they're always looking in different directions. So, the way the statues are looking might cue you in as to what's going on, if they've got their faces averted, or if they're looking at the characters or something. All right, so you want to talk a little bit about M.R. James, maybe? This is the book of his. I hadn't really heard of him, I guess. So, I'll admit that. Until 2 weeks ago, we were looking for something to watch on Netflix or Prime. And there was this documentary on this guy that I hadn't really heard of who wrote ghost stories. And so I thought, let's just watch this documentary about M.R. James. So we watched it, thought, well, I should read some of these stories. And got this book, took it with me on my camping trip last weekend, read a bunch of them. So interesting, because they're, about a little over a century old. Apparently Lovecraft liked these a lot. And this is one of the places Lovecraft was inspired by, the ghost stories of M.R. James. So do you have any thoughts you want to share on those?
Well, I love the way he composed them, that, he was a professor, but at the end of the term around Christmas, he would invite a select few to read a story on Christmas Eve, I guess it was, and with one candle lit for the atmosphere in the room, and they just became so popular. The whole tradition of that, every year he would write his ghost story for that year. That's where a lot of them came from, I guess. There's some, I guess you found maybe some documentaries, or also just some adaptations on YouTube of the various stories, which are fun to watch. There's one that recreates his reading, of the stories. So
yeah, there's been several adaptations apparently of the one that's "Whistle and I'll Come, My Lad." I can't remember exactly the title. It's
Whistle and
I'll Come to You, My Lad. Seems to have had multiple adaptations, but it seems to me that one that would make a better adaptation would have been the Treasure of Abbot Thomas, because you've got the whole guy doing he's got clues, and he's got to decode all these clues if he wants to find this gold that this abbot has buried somewhere on the property, and you could probably make an interesting adaptation of that. It's just that at this point, after I got with that story, I decided I didn't understand the motivations of the characters, I guess. There are a couple stories like that where I don't feel like I understood why things were going on, because it's like, okay, so the backstory is this abbot found or got somehow 10,000 pieces of gold or something. And he buries them, and he's left clues to where he's buried them. Some are in the church windows, and some are in books or whatever. And it turns out he's even used several different ciphers. So you can't just like find the cipher for the first few clues and have it work for the rest of the clues. Then you got to find the ciphers that decode those clues. And so this guy, so no one's ever deciphered it. It's been like 300 or 400 years. And finally, of course, the main character does it and knows where the treasure is. It's in this well. They open up the well. This is when he gets attacked by some, creature. Because the very last thing after all the clues is I've left a guardian. So the thing I didn't understand was, if you're going to leave a guardian, why do you leave the clues? And if you're going to leave, it's like, if you don't want it found, then just don't leave clues and leave the guardian. And then if somebody ever stumbles on it, they're going to, get eaten by the bad thing. But if you want someone to find it, and then so you leave clues, then why do you leave the guardian to keep them from getting? I just found I was confused.
Yeah.
And there are a couple things like that where I get to the end of the story, I'm like, I don't understand why this was set up this way.
Yeah, I suppose that some of it's just artificial, just to be telling a story. The thing about the clues and the guardians, that's really interesting observation about that. Reminds me a little of the Bluebeard story. You can go anywhere in this mansion, but don't open that door. And of course, that's the door you want to open. Why didn't you just tell her not say anything about the door and keep it locked? So maybe, psychologically, it's kind of nice to have a paradox like that built into the story. And the thing about motivation is a lot of his protagonists or people that are telling the story are investigators of some kind. They're looking into archives. They're researching. They're interested in these real obscure parts of British history of some kind, or other places too. So that's interesting because it's sort of a built-in curiosity why they're investigating, because they're doing research, and their research uncovers these things, and there's more to the research than they were led on at the beginning to believe. And so I guess doing the research part gives it some sort of a verisimilitude. Like the story of the mezzotint is the one I've taught many times, and sometimes students are a little bored by it. But I think the research that the guy does, he's trying to figure out the history of this mezzotint. Where did it come from? The provenance, and should his college buy it, basically. So the course of finding out what it's about reveals at the end why the mezzotint behaves the way it does. So I like that aspect of it, that there's a lot of research that sounds really true. I mean, I don't know how much he probably weaves some really good facts in there with some stuff made up, as most authors will do. And so I like that part of it when I'm in the mood for it too, because sometimes he gets into a lot of detail. I liked it, the mezzotint too, and I didn't realize this until years later. Must have been something that Rod Serling was inspired by for the pilot of Night Gallery, because it's not the same story in the Night Gallery episode, but it uses the idea of a painting changing every time the character looks at it, goes up and down the hallway, sees it at a different time, and it sort of reflects what's happening in the story too. I mean, the painting is changing for a reason connected to the character's behavior in the story. I like it too, that the characters are always trying to, and I think this is so real, they're always trying to interpret what they've seen in ways that they understand. Oh, it must be, this room wasn't there last night when I went by the hallway. It must be that it was so dark and I just, miscounted the rooms to my room or something. So they're always trying to rationalize everything that's not very rational. And I just think that's so human to do that until you're faced with the evidence that you can't back away from and realize, okay, there's something supernatural here.
And I do seem to have friends who are quite willing to believe them. I've been a little startled. This is what I was surprised by. When they have something like that, there's a room and it seems to come and go, or whatever is happening in the story that seems supernatural, and then they call a friend in to say, this is what's happening. The friend's always like, I believe you. You know, let's go confront this paranormal thing or whatever. And you're like, wow, they didn't like you. Like, have you been drinking or are you on drugs again? It's like, no, I believe you. And it's like these people have some great friends. Yeah. All right. Final thoughts on Shirley Jackson or M.R. James?
I just recently got Shirley Jackson's, what is it, this one? The Dark Tales. This was printed not too long ago.
Okay.
So I guess it's a collection of the ones. I mean, she wrote a lot of stuff, and not all of it's horror or dark, but those are the Dark Tales. So I'm starting to read through theirs and through there a little bit.
All right. Well, remember, hit like and subscribe and little bell notification button, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.